online gaming, which is really comprised of two segments. There's the online casinos, and then there's the sports betting sites. Now, some online casino also offer sports betting, but sports betting sites typically just focus on sports. Now, um, online gaming sites really are comprised of three main components. There's the platform, and the platform can be an internet gaming platform or an IGP. And this is what the player interacts with when they log on, when they create their account and they receive and redeem, marketing and promotional offers for both casino and sports betting. That's one kind of platform. The other type of platform is a sports betting platform, which is again what the player interacts with when they log on and they create their account. But this is specifically for sports wagering. From a games perspective, there are a number of different game types. The first application can be a remote gaming system, which is where the online games execute from. These would be games like, online slot games or online poker games. Um, a live gaming provider, which is quite interesting. A live gaming provider provides live table gameplay for remote players, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is. And then a line provider, which sets the odds for sporting events. Think of these guys as like the bookies of that you might have seen in movies. And finally, the last piece of technology that is used is the wallet. And the wallet, of course, is the player's money. And the wallet is typically managed by payment processors, which handle the processing of player deposits from banks into the player's wallet and the withdrawals from the player's wallet back to their bank account. Um, and so as I talk through this, keep in mind that you know online is not just your traditional slot games. It's also live table games. It's also sports betting, and that sports betting sites really again only specialize on taking wagers on sporting events. As I go through this today on the online side, just like we did with the land-based side, I'll talk a little bit about the key systems and subsystems that are used. I'll talk a little bit about what is analogous to land-based, but also how they're substantially different as well. And sort of again the technologies that they use. And finally, we'll discuss a little bit the regulatory approvals and the implications related to online gaming, which are in fact very different than those related to land-based. So let's get into it. Okay. Now, when online gaming first started, I think many people thought it would never really work. As I said earlier, humans are social animals. We want to be with others of our kind. We like to socialize. We like to talk. And IRs offers so much more than just gaming. The people argued that online gaming was for a very small subset of the gaming public who were either addicted to gambling or just social outcasts that just didn't like people. Well, how wrong those people were, right? Because online gaming has grown by leaps and bounds, and it's grown rapidly because, well, number one, it's available to players 24 by 7 from anywhere a mobile device can connect to the internet. Even though, yeah, there is geofencing limitations that have been imposed by regulators, by and large, players within a jurisdiction that allows online gaming are free to gamble anytime they want from anywhere they want within the jurisdiction. Online gaming has also grown because the investment required to start an online casino is so significantly less than that required to open an IR. I mean, the first thing you eliminate is the building. You don't need a building to run an online casino. You can actually run it from your living room. You can actually run it from MPI, from one of the classrooms. So you don't need an investment in a building. And initially, in the online space, there were a few companies that developed the online equivalent of a CMS, which is again that Internet Gaming Platform, or IGP. And those few companies also had to create their own game content because, quite frankly, back when online gaming first started, the games were all running in Flash, and obviously slot machine games inside of a physical slot machine cabinet weren't using Flash, so they had to be ported. And to port those games in some cases was more trouble than it was worth, so these companies started to develop their own Flash-based games. Now, I think everybody is aware that Flash is going end of life in a few weeks. At the end of this year, it will still be around, but I don't think it's going to be supported anymore. And for quite a while now, online gaming companies, content providers, have been using HTML5 and not using Flash. Um, so as those game content providers, or game service providers as they're known, started to develop content, then the internet gaming platform guys realized that, well, they can take a step back and focus on just the platform. um, the game service providers use systems that are known as remote gaming systems, or RGSs, and they have to interface with the IGPs, each of which have, you guessed it, a proprietary API. And of course, this slowed things down at first when there was just a handful of IGPs and just a handful of RGSs. But um, as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of all invention, and a new crop of service providers showed up, and these were called aggregators. And what the aggregators did at first was they developed all of the APIs that the IGPs had created. So imagine you've got five internet gaming platform providers, each of which had a proprietary API. And let's say I was the content provider and I had an RGS, and I wanted to connect my RGS to those five different IGPs. Well, I would have to code five separate APIs in order for me to get my game content to show up on those platforms. That's a lot of work. The aggregator said, hey, don't worry about it. We've done all the APIs. You just integrate with us, and we will integrate you with each of those five different platforms. In essence, they were a translation company. You talk English to them, and they talk Greek, Russian, German, French, and Spanish to the other um, platforms. And for that, they collected a fee, a small fee, a modest fee, but it was a fee for every game played. And as you can imagine, this was a lot of money. So they made a ton of it. They made so much money so quickly that they actually were bought up by the larger game service providers, because they said, why would I pay money to this aggregator when in essence I can do the work myself? So the larger ones just bought out the aggregators. For example, Scientific Games with scientific with SG Digital bought a company out of Sweden that was an aggregator that had over 20 different APIs that they had developed. And immediately by doing so, now Scientific Games could provide their content to 20 different platforms. So that was the power that these aggregators had. Um, while that was really cool because now the game service providers could get their content onto multiple platforms faster, there was a problem that the platform providers realized they had. They were actually the guys that were dealing with the players. They were the guys that were creating the accounts, having to deal with all of the issues related to people and customers. And they realized that, you know, there was money to be made without the inherent risks associated with having to deal with the customers, or in this case, the players. So the IGP providers started to white label their platforms to would be operators. So instead of the platform providers also being the operators, they decided, look, why should we take the risk and have to deal with players? We'll just provide the platforms and we'll let other people be operators. And this led to the coining of two new acronyms: B2B, or business to business suppliers, and B2C, or business to customer suppliers. So the online casino operators or the online sportsbook operators are B2C suppliers, and the platform providers and the game service providers are B2B providers, as are the payment processors that handle all of the payments. Now, what's really interesting about this is that the B2C companies now were the online casinos that were offering gaming directly to the players. They're the ones that had to perform the required, know your customer investigations. They had to deal with responsible gaming issues like limit setting and exclusions, and they had to heavily invest in marketing and promotions to retain and to grow their customer base. But really, that was all they had to invest in. It wasn't like they had to invest in buildings, it wasn't like they had to invest in a lot of technology. And they didn't have to do that because the IGPs and the GSPs and the payment processors are willing to provide their platforms and their content and their services on a revenue share perspective. So the amount of capital needed to open an online casino is infinitesimally small compared to the capital investment needed to open a land-based integrated resort. On top of that, B2C operators started to diversify from just slot games. They added online sportsbook, taking, bets on sporting events around the world, and they also started to add live gaming. Now, what is live gaming? This is a very interesting little concept. Live gaming is where live dealers deal games, typically blackjack, although other games are also dealt, but they're dealing these games in front of cameras that are connected to systems that allow remote online players to wager on those games as if they were physically at the table. But as you know, a blackjack table has how many spots? Six. Well, with an online live table game, the number of spots you can have is, much bigger. And the dealer plays the game and communicates with the players as if they were right in front of them. But in reality, the dealer is in a segregated section of either a land based IR floor or, in some jurisdictions, in just a studio. And much like the RGSs providing the online slot games to the IGPs, the live gaming companies now provide streams of table games to the IGPs. So, just to give you an example, there's a company called Evolution Gaming, which is actually licensed out of Malta. It has a studio with over 30 blackjack games in Tbilisi, Georgia. And those dealers are playing games with players logged onto IGPs from around Europe. So, what a concept this is! It's online gaming using land based table games. As I mentioned, money movement in an online casino is very different than money movement in a land based casino. the money is moving from the bank to a player's account, and from the player's account back to the bank electronically. There's no real physical money being handled. So this introduced a number of issues because, well, how are you going to move money from one place to another? Players wanted to use credit cards, they wanted to use debit cards, they wanted to use wire transfers. And when it came to debit cards and credit cards, well, those transactions are coded within the payment processing world, and banks started to deny those transactions because they realized that they were gaming related transactions. So that's where the payment processors stepped in and said, look, we'll act as the middleman. The credit card transaction will be transacted with us. We will then turn around and transact with the bank, but the bank is sort of at arm's length from what the money is actually going to be used for. To them, it's just a money transaction. It's between the payment processor and the IGP to know that this money is actually being deposited into a player's online gaming account. Um, and as the payment processors started to act as monetary clearinghouses, they of course started to do that, as I mentioned, for a revenue share of the online casinos. Some of them do it on a per transaction basis; they charge a fee. Some of it do it based on the amount of money they handle. Some of it do it on a pure revenue share perspective. There's a vast different number of deals that are struck out there. Um, the point I'm trying to make here is that this electronic wallet is the only means for a player to be able to wager on an online casino. Now, initially, the electronic wallet was built in to the internet gaming platform, but then the IGP started to realize that this was, pretty um, sophisticated and sort of a one-off piece of functionality that was probably better handled by the payment processors because, well, that's what they did. They dealt with money. They had banking industry experience. They were already governed using. They were governed by banking regulations. So some of these payment processors started to offer e-wallet services that were outside of the operator's platform, outside of the IGP. And this new service really then freed up the operator from even having to deal with monetary account risk. So, you know, think about this. The online operator not only does not have to have a building, not only does not have to, have a lot of capital investment in technology that they have to buy. Not only do they not need a lot of employees, but now they don't even have to deal with money. It's all being done as a service. So all of these service providers are essentially offering their solutions as a service to the operator, and the operator pays a fee for this technology. It's very very different from land-based IRs. Now, let me talk a little bit about wallets because this is important. There are two types of wallets. There are those that use transactional wallets, and there are those that use seamless wallets. Now, as the name implies, a transactional wallet actually debits and credits a player account after every transaction. So they work with a single game. How does that work? Well, so if a player is playing a game and they say wager $5, then the e-wallet is debited for $5. The game spins. If the player wins $10, then the wallet is credited for $10. Now that's happening, transaction by transaction. Well, so what happens if a player wants to play multiple games at the same time? Um, you could run into a situation where the wallet does not have enough money for a transaction. So what they do in that case is they actually take a portion of the player's wallet and they tie it up with a particular game so that they know that there's enough money for the transactions to occur. And what that does, in essence, is it really limits the amount of money that a player can be playing because their wallet is being divided up based on the number of games that they're playing. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why would they be playing multiple slot machines at the same time? Well, they might not be, but they might be playing a poker game. They might be playing in a poker tournament. They might be playing blackjack. They might be playing, a number of games, and also playing a slot machine game on the side. So one game is a lot slower and the other game is a lot faster. And so you could, play multiple games simultaneously. A seamless wallet, however, works very differently. Um, with a seamless wallet, um, the wallet handles debits and credits as they occur and immediately updates them to the player's main wallet seamlessly. So there is no money that has to be committed to a particular game, and the player has full access to their wallet all of the time. And what we're seeing is that transactional wallets are slowly starting to fade away, and more people are using seamless wallets. And this actually is a good thing because seamless wallets um, might actually be the way land-based players start to play in the future. Um, because, as I said, now there's this sort of dichotomy where players are playing online and they're playing land-based, and because of COVID, they've played more online, and then they'll come back to land-based, but they've got money in this wallet that's online. And why can't I access that money that's in my wallet online and actually use it when I'm in the land-based casino? I mean, it's my gambling wallet, so why can't I leverage it across all of my gambling spend? So I think you'll see this sort of technology start to evolve in certainly in 2021, and these wallets becoming more pervasive. I will tell you that in Canada, in the Canadian provinces where they offer land-based, online, and lottery, and it is um, one governmental corporation that offers those three different verticals. Many of them are working very hard to have one seamless wallet that is available for the players to be able to play online, to play online lottery, to buy lottery tickets in a retail establishment in a store, and to go to a land-based casino and again use that seamless wallet. And as I mentioned, when I was talking about land-based and the marker technology and the electronic funds transfer technology, there is no anonymity here. We know exactly who the player is. We know exactly how much money is being transacted. So, from a responsible gambling and from a player protection perspective, having access to this information actually empowers operators and regulators to better protect that small percentage of the gaming public that does have a problem handling gambling. So some good things will come out of these seamless wallets. Now, let's talk a little bit about how online gaming actually happens, right? Um, so there are a number of systems, at least three or four different systems, potentially from different vendors that have to integrate together over the public internet, obviously using encryption and VPNs and other means to secure the transactions. But they're actually doing this over the public internet. And those connections are from the platform to the gaming content, the platform to the wallet, the RGS, the gaming content, the remote gaming system, to the jackpot controller. Oh, the jackpot controller. So, um, much like in land based, the jackpot controller is separate from the slot machines, and the wide area jackpot controller is also separate from the slot machines. In the online world, there are service providers that today provide nothing more than progressive jackpot functionality. And yes, they do it as a service, and yes, they charge a fee. But what's really cool about this is that now, these progressive jackpot system providers are innovating in all kinds of new progressive jackpots. And if you as an operator want to participate in a progressive jackpot or in a particular jackpot, all you have to do is subscribe to the service that these guys provide, and all of a sudden your games are participating in the jackpot, and you're linked in with other operators across a virtual geographic space. Very cool stuff. Yet, as you can see from the red lines, each of those are proprietary APIs. So, whose proprietary API is being used? Well, just like in most factors in life, or uh, the the big dog is the one that dictates, whose API is going to be used. So if the IGP provider is a really big company that has a lot of customers and has a lot of power, then it's probably going to be their API that's going to be used, and not some small remote service provider, or sorry, game service provider, or RGS. Um, if the game service provider, the content provider, is a really big company and has a really big, rich library of game themes that operators want because players want to play those game themes, well, then they have the power, and it'll probably be their API that would be used. So let me give you an example. So companies like IGT or Scientific Games or Novomatic GreenTube that have, like I said, an extensive library of game themes from their land-based operations, well, they've got the power because their themes are desired, they're sought after, and therefore they can tell IGPs, you have to use my API. Big platform providers like microgaming or playtech, whose white labeled platforms are being used by many, many operators, have the power to say, no, you will use my API if you want to get your game content onto my platform and onto, and made available to the gaming public through the operators that have licensed my platform. So that's sort of how the negotiation happens. And because of these negotiations, something new has happened. Remember when I said the aggregators originally were people that were developing those proprietary APIs, and they were acting sort of like translators? Instead of having to implement five different APIs, if I'm a game content provider and want to get my games onto five different platforms, I could just go to the aggregator and they've done those integrations. Well, now aggregators are back, but they're different. What aggregators are doing now is they're going to the small game service providers and they're saying, look, guys, you're too small to try and stand up to the Playtex and the microgamings of the world. You're way too small when you compare yourselves to the Scientific Games or the Aristocrats or the Konamis or the Novomatics of the world. So there is no way that you are not going to have to program to somebody else's API. But if you come with me and you aggregate your content onto my aggregator platform, then you don't have to worry about that. I will do those APIs. And if we have enough game service providers that have been aggregated together, we become as big as a Scientific Games, as big as an IGT, as big as an Aristocrat. And now we too have the power to go to the IGPs and say, no, You're going to do my API. I'm not going to do yours because look at the amount of game content that I have aggregated in my portfolio and look at what I'm bringing to the table. So these aggregators um, have started to create a lot of power for themselves. So much so that some of the IGPs actually are aggregators themselves. And not only that, just to really confuse things, aggregators are integrating with other aggregators. So what does that mean? Well, it means that imagine Philip has a portfolio of properties that he rents out, and I've got a portfolio of properties that I rent out. So we get together and say, hey, look, if we link our portfolios together, we have twice the number of properties that we can rent out. And when we go to Peter, who happens to be the guy that wants to, rent properties, we are going to have much more of a rich offering to show because we're showing him all of our properties combined. That's exactly what is happening in the online space today. You've got aggregators integrating into other aggregators, integrating into platforms to provide more and more content to the operators. Now, I think it's also important to say that in the online world, um, there are many, many, many more content providers than in the land based space. So if you think about who are the slot machine manufacturers in the land based space, I've been mentioning some of them. The big ones are IGT, Scientific Games, Aristocrat, Konami, um, Novomatic. In Europe, you've got others like EGT, Casino Technology, but there's there's let's say maybe 20 of them that are really the most prominent slot machine manufacturers. In the online side, there are at least 500, and the number is growing in terms of content providers. Two people, two guys, or two engineers that think they can create a game model, a game math model, can go and create content in their garage, and all of a sudden, they're a content provider. Um, the number of platforms actually is much smaller in the online world, very similar to how it is in the land based side from a CMS perspective. There's only a handful of really good platforms. And then operators, there's a ton of them. Because again, the capital investment to become an operator is very small, so there's lots and lots of operators. And just like mergers and acquisitions occurred in the land based side, so too are mergers and acquisitions now happening in the online side. So the big ones are, buying up and integrating the smaller ones. And I think as 2021 approaches and as COVID goes away, and as we'll see how uh, the gaming public starts to react to casinos and gaming parlors reopening, we might see some significant M&A activity occurring in the online side. So because there are so many of these proprietary APIs, and because there are these rather contentious, um, I'll call them negotiations for lack of a better word, as to whose API we're going to use. Our members, our GSA members, came to us and they said, "Look, guys, there's an opportunity here to create a standard very similar to how you guys created a standard in the land-based side for slot machines to communicate to casino management systems. We would like for you to develop a standard for how game service providers, the equivalent of the slot machines, communicate to the IGPs, the equivalent of the CMSs." And GSA said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. We can create that standard," and we did. And that standard is called the third party interface. standard, or TPI. And what TPI does is exactly what I described. It creates a standardized um, single API, eliminates the need for all of these APIs, and uses an open standard. And interestingly enough, Playtech, which is one of the largest IGPs and aggregators and um, and game service provider, has already adopted this and is forcing other companies like IGT and Scientific Games and Inspired Gaming to adopt it as well. And microgaming, which is another big IGP aggregator and game service provider, has also implemented TPI to aggregate their aggregator platform, sorry, to integrate their aggregator platform into Playtech's aggregator platform. So again, we're starting to see a slow adoption of a open standard protocol to replace these proprietary APIs that have existed. However, much like we run into an issue in LandBased where people say, well, I've already invested money in this API. This API already works. Why should I spend money to implement a different API that is essentially going to give me the same functionality? Um, we see adoption of TPI taking some time and being slow as well. So I think I was at alphabet soup when I was talking about land-based casinos. I think now that I'm talking about online, I am beyond alphabet soup. So maybe using this diagram, I'll talk a little bit about how all of this really works. So you've got players that are sitting at home. They've got their own device. It could be a laptop. It could be a mobile phone. It could be whatever. Obviously, they're connected via a router to the public internet. And then from that public internet, they are going to connect to an online gaming site, which is running an IGP. That online gaming site could be called Jackpot Party. It could be called, Jackpot Joy. It could be called 888. It could be called any one of a bazillion different names of the online casinos that exist in the world. Um, when I log on to that online gaming site as a player, I have to create an account. And to create an account, I have to provide the online gaming operator with a whole bunch of of personally identifiable information. The amount of PII that I have to provide differs based on the jurisdiction that I happen to be in. If I'm a French citizen, before I can actually have an account, I have to provide them all of my bank information, my address, my date of birth, my national ID number, and then what they do is actually send me a letter to the address I specified with a code, and I've got 24 hours to log on to the regulator's website to provide that code to prove that the address I gave them was actually mine. The online gaming operator has to go verify with the banks that I provided that the bank accounts are actually mine and that I can afford to actually gamble because the balance of the funds that I've got in the bank account is such that I am allowed to gamble. That's just one example of the KYC, or know your customer verification, that the online operators have to do. Once I've done that, now I have to create an account with a payment processor. Why? Well, because I need to transfer money from my bank to that wallet. And the payment processor is going to ask me for a bunch of personally identifiable information. They want to know who I am, where I live, what my phone number is, what my national ID is, where my bank accounts are, what my balance is. because they want to make sure that I can transfer money from those banks accurately in through the payment processor to this wallet that I'm going to create. And once I've done that, then I've got money in the wallet. And now I can actually log on to the online gaming site, select a game that I want to play. And when I do that, I get pushed off of the online gaming site and down to the game service provider's system, because that's where the games actually execute. When I log on to the online gaming site, I'm just logging on to a portal. The online gaming site does not actually have any games on it. All it has on it is my account, a link to my wallet, and a link to the game service providers where the games actually reside. And then as I wager on those games, the money goes from the e-wallet provider through the online gaming site down to the GSP. The game plays. If I win, the money goes from the GSP through the online gaming site back down to the e-wallet provider. And all of these guys are, of course, getting a fee for these transactions. If the game I happen to be playing is part of a progressive jackpot, then when I play the game, a portion of my wager gets sent to the progressive jackpot provider, where the progressive meter is incremented. And then if I happen to be lucky enough to win that progressive jackpot, it is the progressive jackpot provider that tells the game running on the game service provider what I won. And then from the game service provider, that amount is communicated to the online gaming site. And from the online gaming site, it gets communicated to my wallet provider, and the money shows up in my wallet. And finally, when I want to cash out, I tell my wallet provider to cash out and send the money to my bank, and then I can, spend the money on something else. So that's really how it all works in reality. A lot of transactions going around in the public internet, all encrypted, all systems needing to know where this communication is coming from and where the response is going to. And all of these transactions are logged and they're monitored, and they are stored for a variety of different lengths of time, the minimum of which is 3 years. And if you do have questions, by all means, I'd love to answer your questions, and I'd love to make sure that there's a dialogue on this, because it is quite interesting. It's actually very fascinating to me. And I have been spending a lot of time now working on the online space. So it's become quite routine for me. And having to break it down and to talk about it was actually an eye-opening exercise for me, because what I thought was routine is difficult. It's different when you're trying to explain it to somebody else. So,
sorry, I have some questions about online gaming.
yes.
You said that if a player apply for a gaming account, send information, banking information, the gender, other personal information to the online gaming operator, and the gaming operator verify their information through the bank, through the other organization. Can they do that? Do they allow to query the personal account information for particular account holders in the bank?
Not only are they allowed to, but they are required by the regulators.
So they have the right to just query whether the account holders' information are correct, and even the bank the balance, even the balance of the.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in England, in the United Kingdom, online gaming operators not only have to understand how much money you've got in the bank, but they also have to ask you how much money you make a year. And then based on your occupation and your annual income, they've got to make a determination as to how much money they think you can afford to gamble. And if you gamble more than that amount, they have to flag that you're gambling too much. and they have to refer you to an organization called GamCare, where they will call you and have a conversation with you to inform you that you're potentially gambling beyond your means. So the again, this is, online is very different from land-based because nothing that happens online is anonymous. We know exactly who the player is. We know exactly where they live. We know exactly where they're playing from. I mean, we've got their IP address, for crying out loud. We know how much they've gambled. We know how much they've deposited. We know how much time they spend gambling. So the operators have a lot of responsibility to make sure that they do whatever is necessary from a player protection perspective to protect the player. And you will see, if you go out and read, what happens with online operators in the regulated markets, is a lot of them sometimes get fined a lot of money because they don't do responsible gambling, or player protection correctly. Um, so
So
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Would there be a concern of the privacy violation of privacy information? Do, do, do they care? Do they have a concern about this?
That's
Because it,
actually that's a great question. That's a very, very, very good question. So here's the interesting thing, right? So in Europe, last year, they passed the general GP General Data Protection Requirement, GDPR. And basically, what the GDPR law states is that a person has the right to tell a business to forget about me, to delete all of my data, and a business only has the right to collect the minimum amount of personally identifiable information necessary, and they have to prove that they need to collect this information. Now, you would think, to your point, that payment processors and online gaming operators collecting all of this personally identifiable information would be absolutely against the GDPR requirement, except that the GDPR requirement has one little sentence in it that says, unless required by regulators. And if the regulator tells an operator, you have to collect this information because you have to assess the risk that this player is going to take, well, then the operator has no choice but to collect the information and to assess the risk, because the regulator is the one that licenses the operator. And if the operator doesn't do it, then the regulator can fine the operator, and worse, they can potentially take their license away. So this is the issue that has been created in Europe, where on the one hand, all of this personally identifiable information is being collected. On the other hand, there's this significant player data, or not player, just personal data protection law that has been put into place. How do you balance the two? It's a very, very interesting dance.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Because MPI is we treat MPI as if you guys are part of GSA or IGSA. One of the things that we are working on with the European Commission and with the European Committee for Standardization is an idea on how to better protect the player identity and how to better protect all of this personally identifiable information that is floating around. To the question that you asked, we know for a fact that players of land-based IRs and casinos have player loyalty cards from 2, 3, 4, 6 different properties, right? Because they visit 2, 3, 4, 6 different properties. And that's having to physically go from one location to another. In online, I don't have to go anywhere. I'm sitting in front of my laptop and I'm just clicking from one URL to a different URL. Yes, I have to provide a lot of information to create an account, but if I don't care, I'll provide all that information. Now I've got accounts with 6 different online casinos, which might mean I've got accounts or wallets with 6 different payment processors. So there are 12 business out there that have very highly sensitive, personally identifiable information stored in their databases. That doesn't sound very secure, does it? That doesn't sound very GDPR compliant, does it? So, what some of the payment processors are actually doing out of self defense, because they don't want their databases hacked and their names being in the press as having had all of this player personal identifiable information stolen, they're actually deleting the information. They're getting it, they're using it to verify the player, they're getting it to ensure that the bank statements and the bank accounts and the bank balances and all that stuff is accurate. But as soon as they've done it, they're actually deleting all of the PII information because they don't want the risk. Unfortunately, the online operators do not have that luxury. They have to keep it. So again, we're working on an idea that will better protect all of this data and protect the operators from some of this risk that they're facing today.
Yes, thank you.
Great question, though. Great question.
Mark, I have a question about the online gaming. So
Yes.
you talk about regulator from on the operator side. So let's say if the operator is registered in Malta, then they are regulated by Malta regulatory board, something like that, right? But what about the player side? Let's say are mainland China resident allowed to do online gaming? Are they regulated by the mainland China government, or are there some cooperation between governments of two countries?
Um, Cooperation is a bit of of too strong of a word. So here's kind of how it works. The operator has to be licensed in the country where the players are playing from. So if you are the operator, microgaming, and you are operating out of France, and you're offering your online casino to French citizens, you have to be licensed by the French government. However, the game service providers do not have to be licensed by the French government, and they do not have to be physically in France. So the game service providers, the guys who actually have the game content, could be licensed in Malta, could have their servers in Malta, but their games are being offered on online casinos operating in France, provided to French citizens. And that is allowed. Now, there are some operators that are licensed in Gibraltar, licensed in Malta, licensed in Alderney, who do not filter out IP addresses and who allow Chinese citizens, for example, to log on and gamble on their sites. That is not quite illegal, not quite legal. There's different interpretations. If the Chinese government allows Chinese citizens to do that, then the operators argue, who am I to prevent them from doing it? Right? No different than shopping on Alibaba or shopping on Amazon. You can shop wherever you want. That's sort of the argument that they use. But typically, the online casino operator has to be licensed in the jurisdiction where their casino operates. And typically also they have to ensure that only people within the boundaries of that country are playing on their online casino, which is where the geofencing comes in. Moving on, some interesting things also happening in the online world, where there is this sort of commingling of land-based with online. I've already talked about live table games, but let me now talk about online gaming in a brick and mortar location. What? Yeah, I mean, this is happening today. So, do you remember when server based gaming came out? And initially, server based gaming was game content that was stored on a server that was downloaded to a slot machine and then it executed inside of that slot machine. Well, now there's a new type of server based gaming that has come into being. And it's come into being because, as we've discussed, online gaming has grown at such a faster rate than land-based gaming in many jurisdictions. That growth fueled by 24-hour anywhere gaming, coupled with the lower capital requirements, that has put traditional brick and mortar casino companies at a significant disadvantage. I mean, some of these jurisdictions have recognized that, wow, these brick and mortar land based companies spend a lot of money, employ a lot of people, and yet they are now at a significant disadvantage vis a vis the online gaming operators in the same jurisdiction. So they're trying to take small steps to allow the land based operators to, again, in a very small way, tap into some of that online 24 by 7 gaming that's occurring. So, this new type of server based gaming essentially is where the slot machine cabinet on a casino floor, on an IR floor, is nothing but a dumb terminal. But instead of connecting to a server that is inside the IR downloading game content, that that terminal is actually connecting to the internet and accessing the same online games as if the player was at home using their laptop. Interesting, huh? And what's interesting about this is that for a long time, there was a strong belief that online games were very different than land based games, and that land based gaming customers would not like online games. And the reason for that is that online games play slightly differently, not only because they're HTML5, but also because the return to player percentages in online are typically higher than the online than the return to player percentages in land based. And that stands to reason, right? Because there's more competition and there's less cost, so they can afford to pay out more. And because of that, the volatility, the math models are slightly different. The volatility is slightly different. But what we're seeing is that, well, land-based gaming customers are also playing online. So obviously, they don't have an issue playing those online games. And what we're seeing now with this new version of servers-based gaming is that land-based players are more than willing to play these slot machines, even though they're simpler games. So keep in mind, right? You go to an IR and you see slot machines that have 3 different displays and they're huge and they're high def, and you've got all these intricate bonus rounds that go off. Well, you don't have any of that in an online game because, well, I only have one screen. It's the screen in front of my laptop, right? So the games are much simpler. And that's another reason why, a lot of experts thought that land-based gaming customers would not really enjoy playing those online games. But by and large, I think they're starting to be proven wrong. The other thing that's going on is this thing called sports betting terminals. Now, I mentioned that, online gaming is not just about casino games. It's not just about poker, but it's also about obviously sports wagering. And believe it or not, sports wagering is sort of the hottest thing happening in North America right now. Obviously the states in the US specifically are starving for tax revenue given the fact that they've shut down so many businesses. So, allow people to gamble on sports online and tax the heck out of that is sort of the money making scheme of the day. But again, sports betting in casinos has existed in Nevada for, God, 60 years. I mean, sportsbook has been around forever, and sportsbook in casinos has, been around for a long time in other jurisdictions as well. So what is different with this sports betting terminal? Well, what's different is that instead of going to a sports book and, walking up to a cage and wagering using that methodology, you're actually walking up to a kiosk, which is running the same software you'd be running on your laptop if you logged on to a sports betting site. And now you can place wagers online. And the beauty of this is that you can use your online wallet to place these wagers. You don't have to put, money into a bill acceptor in these terminals. No, you log on, you access your online wallet, you place a wager, you get an online ticket. You can opt to print out a piece of paper as a receipt or the ticket itself with all your wagers on it, and you've done it online, but inside of a brick and mortar facility. So that's pretty interesting. The other thing that I've already mentioned is these live table games where the dealers are playing games in front of cameras. Well, many jurisdictions are allowing land-based casinos, land-based IRs, to designate sections of their casino floors to be live table game areas where there are no customers actually sitting at those table games. It's just dealers, typically younger, attractive women who are the dealers, and they're sitting in front of these cameras with all these LED lights, and they're dealing the blackjack games and talking to the players that are logged on remotely from different sites. And this is allowing the land-based casinos to generate some additional revenues by tapping into, again, that online gaming sector that they were essentially shut out of. Interestingly enough, in some jurisdictions that shut down casinos due to COVID, they actually allowed the live table games to continue to operate, specifically because there are no players. It's just the dealers. The table games had to be, separated by at least 6 meters. 2 meters, 6 feet. But they allowed them to continue to operate. So at least they were still able to generate some revenue, even though, quote unquote, the casino per se was shut down. So some interesting things. So let's do a little land-based to online comparison. As we said, land-based is a physical property with large capital investment. Online, it's a virtual casino with practically no capital investment, although in truth, you have to buy some servers and you have to invest in, putting those servers in some sort of a data center, a colo facility. So there is some money to be invested. On the land-based side, there's lots and lots of systems. On the online side, it's a smaller number of systems. Obviously, lots and lots of employees on the land-based side, but very few employees, and mostly customer support, KYC KYC employees, and then marketing people. On the land-based side, as I mentioned, there are relatively few slot and table game suppliers. On the online side, it's lots and lots and lots of content providers. In the land-based side, the CMS is the key critical system. In online, it's really a combination. It's the IGP, the RGS, and the wallet systems are the critical ones. In land-based, we do minimal KYC. I mean, when you're walking into a casino, a security guard might look at you to see if you're over the minimum required age. And if you don't look to be old enough, they might stop you and ask for ID. But other than that, you walk right in and you're anonymous. You can go play a slot machine or put money on a table game and nobody knows who you are. In online, lots and lots of KYC. And then from a reporting perspective, there's modest reporting requirements on land-based, and we haven't touched on this yet, but we will. There is extensive reporting requirements put on the online side.